Hello, it's your boy Mine, and I'm going to be talking about the corruption scandal that led to Qatar getting the right to host the World Cup in 2022. It all started in 2010 with the outcome of the Zurich vote, and guess what happened? Who won the right to host the World Cup? It was Russia in 2018. Russia had got the right to host the World Cup in 2018. Guess what happened? A war with Ukraine with over 50,000 people dead. Then Qatar got the right to host the World Cup in 2022. Guess what? More than 6,500 workers dead since they won the right to host the World Cup, and that was just from 5 countries. So that was just from literally just 5 countries: India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. So that's just the 5, so not from more countries, so there's probably a lot more that died. So when Qatar won the right to host the World Cup, they were just a country of 2.8 million people, with the 3rd largest natural gas reserves in the world, the 13th largest oil reserves, and the average person per capita earns an amount of $81,000 per GDP. In summer the average temperature is 45 degrees, and some people were like, well, FIFA and Qatar were like, well, especially FIFA, they were like, hang on, we can't host the World Cup in this sweltering heat. I know that the bid for the World Cup was for summer, but we're going to change it to winter. Yeah, even when Qatar won the right to host the World Cup and FIFA accepted the right for them to host the World Cup, they insisted for a while, if you remember, that the World Cup was going to be in summer. They were a bit stubborn about it, but they changed their tune quickly when they realised what FIFA were like. Qatar realised FIFA were just bent over backwards, so I guess that's what happened. So, but I don't think that's actually a big strike against Qatar. Like, the world's a pretty big place, and eventually North Africa, or perhaps a country in the Middle East, would have eventually hosted the World Cup with or without Qatar. So you could even say it was inevitable that the World Cup would eventually change seasons. That's not fair to a part of the world, so I'm not going to be complaining about this actually as much as you might think. But it has affected players, you know. Sadio Mane's missed out on the World Cup partly because it happened during the mid-season. The World Cup being at the end of the year gives players a time to rest, to recuperate, and gives them a few weeks to recover. They can go to the training camp, they can think things through, and they can just get ready for the biggest tournament on the planet. Having the World Cup mid-season, that kind of changes everything, because the players just in a completely different mindset. They're fighting for the Premier League, they're fighting for the Champions League, they're fighting for the domestic competition, whatever it is, and suddenly they're in the World Cup. So there's got to be that's that sudden change, that sudden switch, tactics, formations, flexibility, the players being picked, it all changes, and players that might have had a few weeks to recover before the World Cup that could have just made it, they're going to miss out because there is no recovery time. This World Cup is bang right in the middle of the season, squeezed tightly. That's all it is. That's what it is. So, they should definitely have not been considered for a summer World Cup, which they did insist both Qatar and FIFA was the case, but we've already talked through that. So the amount that Qatar spent to host the World Cup, it was $220 billion, so not a small amount of cash, lads. In comparison, Russia in 2018 with their oil money as well, 11.6 billion. Brazil in 2014, 15 billion, but they were also hosting the Olympics in 2016, but there was massive widespread protests in Brazil, and they live and breathe football there, so you got to keep that in mind. And South Africa, 3.6 billion. 6.5 billion was spent on stadio allowance, just on the stadiums. 36 billion was spent on the transport infrastructure. I know they have oil money, but that's absolutely mental. So the transport infrastructure and the hotel infrastructure, just to clarify, I think that's just for some of that soft power, some of that tourism. If you don't know what soft power is, it's like America with its Hollywood industry, with its music. With Hollywood, it's like Britain with the Queen, Buckingham Palace, Vindaloo and Doctor Who. It's like Japan with its anime, its robots, its technology, its culture, its businesses. It's just along those lines. It's soft power and its influence on the world that's not necessarily political, that has just a streamlined effect to help other countries accept Qatar as being more legitimate, as being more a part of the aspects of their daily thoughts. So if you generally think about a country, or when you do think about a country, it's just a positive, streamlined idea. I think that's what Qatar was aiming for in the World Cup. Unfortunately for them, it hasn't worked out like it did for Russia. Unfortunately, Russia's attempt at soft power in 2018, complete success even after the invasion of Ukraine, even after the attempt to poison a Russian that had some dirt on the government, like a Russian spy attempted to poison him and he was like in a coma in a hospital. I forgot his name, but he barely survived. So you got to think about that. A city in Qatar literally didn't exist. I think the city that is hosting the opening game, Lusail, it didn't exist. They spent $45 billion just on the city to exist. I think it's because Qatar are realizing that oil is a non-renewable resource. Eventually, oil is going to run out. They're not going to be having this oil, and other countries will no longer be paying a premium. They're looking at investing and divvying up and just establishing some kind of reputation around the world, so they can have some sustainable income in the future. So that's just what they're ultimately planning for. They want to be like a hotbed in the Middle East. They want to be what people think of when they think of Asia, let alone that region. So you just got to think about that. 1.7 million workers make up 90% of the workforce in Qatar, and those are migrant workers. Just to clarify, they came under the guise of just having a better life, better working conditions, and to give money and to send it back to their families. They wanted to provide for themselves, they wanted to have a better life, and they wanted to be treated with greater respect and have more opportunity and movement. Unfortunately, the opposite happened, and they were little better than indentured servants. Under extreme circumstances, you can almost describe them as slaves, modern day slaves. Under this system, employees did not have the right to move jobs. They had their passports taken away, and they were paid an extreme pittance, if they were paid at all, compared to what they were promised by the recruiters. Recruiters generally attracted these migrants with a promise of good working conditions, good pay, and the flexibility to leave the country at any time, change jobs, and to be able to send money back home with little to no issues. Unfortunately for them, a lot of the time, most of the time, that was in fact a complete lie, and that was not good. That's just not on. In that regard, generally these recruiters generally ask for an upfront fee when they were already being paid by these companies and private recruiters within Qatar, probably backed by the Qatari government. And a lot of the time, these workers couldn't pay off these loans, so when they arrived in Qatar, they wouldn't be paid properly or paid at all, and they would have to pay back a loan over a long duration and period of time in less than ideal conditions with little to no rights. They couldn't change jobs, and they didn't have a passport so they could return home, and a sponsor could withdraw sponsorship of these migrant workers at any time. When these migrant workers came to Qatar, they generally had a sponsor, so their role as in the workplace within Qatar was legitimate. But unfortunately for them, they were little better than indentured servants or slaves, and that just wasn't good. For a lot of these workers, the priority was their families, so for what little money they did earn, they would have to send back to their families instead of saving money to go back home. And coming back illegally from Qatar is not the best journey. They would have to cross through the deserts and the political climate that is the Middle East if they went through the land, or they would have to cross through the sea illegally in less than ideal circumstances, which is not actually that good. It's not ideal, and that's not what they wanted, so that's why they just continue to work in these less than ideal, depraved conditions under bosses that didn't respect them, who just played down the death figures. If some workers died, they could just easily be replaced. There was always desperate workers, and there was always a flow, and there was always a demand due to the World Cup stadiums being built, and due to the projects and just in Qatar in general, just at that time. So you just got to think about that. FIFA is just famous for its racketeering, laundering and money fraud, so it's just not surprising that they won the right to host the World Cup. Sepp Blatter said recently it was a mistake to give Qatar the World Cup, and I think it's right. It was a long time coming, but he finally said the right thing in that regard. That doesn't take away from what's happened in the past, but finally he's done a bit of good. Unfortunately for him, that's like a tiny pin compared to a mountain, so what good has it done for us? What good has it done for the people of World Cup? And what good has it done for FIFA? 16 of the 22 executives that were involved in the World Cup vote, they were accused of corruption. So they were accused of just being bribed easily just by the Qatari officials. It was a closed, intimate process, and everybody knew who was who just in regards to the responsibility of voting for the FIFA World Cup. And there's probably information in regards to how susceptible or how open they were in regards to listening or to receiving bribes. In fact, it was expected, because later on when England failed to host the 2018 World Cup, there was at least a few incidents where FIFA officials were openly asking for bribes. One of them even asked for a knighthood. It's absolutely mental. In regards to that, many celebrities have been brought out just in regards to the World Cup. Off the top of my head is David Beckham, Tim Cahill and Gary Neville. Absolutely disgraceful, especially the celebrities that have participated and have spoken out for minorities in the past in regards to gay rights, LGBT and just human rights in general. It's absolutely hypocritical and absolutely disgraceful, and it just puts them in a position where you can see their true morals. They're comfortably well off, they're millionaires, and they're set for a life, but this is the decision they've made. This is the decision they've made in their one lifetime, and that's what they have to live through, and that's what we've all seen. It's absolutely disgraceful. In regards to the alcohol zones during the World Cup, recently I've heard that they've moved alcohol zones even further away from the stadium. The average alcohol price is $12.55 per pint, and you can only get Budweiser. Just in that regard, you can get a meal with chicken and chips and a soft can drink, and that will be less than that, I think. So, not the best experience. In fact, they're thinking about banning drinking within the stadiums. I mean, like the selling and purchasing of alcohol within the stadiums completely. So, that's just what you got to think. In regards to this, Qatar's relations with other countries just within the Middle East just completely collapsed around this point. Al Jazeera, the news network, you probably heard of them, reported negatively in regards to the other Middle Eastern countries, so they were absolutely furious. This resulted in a blockade that lasted until past the Asian Cup, but that's ended. They've just put their differences aside just in regards to hosting the FIFA World Cup. So in that regard, Qatar is an autocratic country with no political parties allowed. So it has a monarchy. There's not much for freedom of speech. There's not much for being progressive. There's not much for just in general social mobility if you're not already part of the established Qatari population. For example, if you're just a migrant that has come to Qatar for the better life, there's not much opportunity and there's not much to be said. Once these migrants are finished with their work, they're just going back. There's not much mobility to just settle in the country, establish themselves, have a good life and have their families move over. They're going straight back, and that's just what it is. That's just what's going to happen just in that regard. So that's just what you got to think. So Qatar's just won this in absolutely mental and disgusting circumstances. It's absolutely insane that this could happen in the year 2022. You would have thought that more people would have spoken out. You would have thought that some governments would have stepped in. You would have thought that the United Nations would have said something. You would have thought there would have been a few withdrawals, maybe even player strikes. You would have just thought there was more of an outcry, more said by religious figures, but there has been minimal to no backlash. There has been nothing. Some people might have been legit expecting this, but it's been more like this, and that's why the Qatari government are hosting the World Cup. Absolutely disgrace, and it's absolutely mental. It's your choice to watch the World Cup. If you don't want to, I'll support you all the way. Donate to charities just in regards to worker rights and relations within Qatar. Amnesty International is a great charity, so just think about it, just be more aware of what's going on in the news, and just remember, one person can have a difference on many people. We're a social species, and we can communicate with the world. We can interact. We have access to social media, we have access to YouTube, so make a difference, make a change, and stay safe in these trying times. Thank you, and have a good night.
Liverpool couldn't test the way me raw sit up quick draw. Him drop and can't get up, him not fast enough for my problem that you never solve. Send for the Dan brace for your firestorm, cause I turn into a monster. Ready for the war, with a wig of black. None of them boy them
Like and subscribe, you guys.